When creating a custom project from scratch, there's often a few very common places that students get hung up on right away that can really ruin a lot of the efficiency of actually dealing with interesting code, just getting kind of stuck up on the initial starting steps of getting a project up and running. So I'd like to offer you this video to be able to follow along with to kind of get your project structure kind of built in a nice way and give you a couple strategies for how you could plot out the initial phases of your project in a nice, efficient, but also really helpful manner. I've just created a simple example project with an example.java file. And one thing that we have to remember in Java is that we always need this public static void main. Remember, I can type this and hit tab to get this main method built. This is always where our project begins. And we sometimes run into a problem with this because what if I wanted to have a method called public void start game, for example? I want this just to be the place where my game starts and initializes. So I'm going to print out game begins here. And I tried to actually reference this to start my game when everything begins. And I try to run my code. Now, I didn't pre-build all this, but let's let it load. While we think about what might be the issue here, which is that this all exists, but the static word is the problem. We have a build failure. And the reason is that a static main has to reference static methods. So I could go public static void start game and get this to work. But then any other content from here is if I go like part 1, I want to run a method for part 1. I go maybe private because it's a helper method here, private void part 1, and create the outline of a method. This complains because now this has to be static to match up with this static to match up with this static. And suddenly everything that we make becomes static, which for simple projects isn't going to be an issue, but the more complex our projects get, particularly once we start using inheritance and hierarchies, well, it's going to break a lot of stuff and be super hard to troubleshoot. So we want to get rid of the static as soon as possible. So what do we do to do that? Well, an easy initial strategy here is to just make our runner class just kind of a launcher or a runner in the first place. And I'm going to make a separate class for my actual game. So when I make this game class here, in my example, I can go game equals new game and instantiate it. Now I'm actually creating an object, which means its constructor is being run. So if I go into my game and tidy things up here a little bit, and I think about making a constructor, public game, now anything in here, welcome to my game, there's no statics to be seen. So if I run my code here, I should see that it's just going to print out, welcome to my game. It runs no problem without any of these annoying statics because the static is dealt with over here, and instantiating game doesn't require a static, and since it's instantiating, it's running the constructor right here. This is actually a constructor call, in fact. So over here for the game, I run the constructor and it says welcome to my game. And now I can go to maybe start part 1 if I had like a story, and maybe, oops, got a little too aggressive on my keyboard there. Private void start part 1. It's just a helper method to be able to start writing the storyline part 1. And if I run my project here, it should say welcome to my game and part 1 ... So now I can work in this class with the statics completely in the rearview mirror from the example, and I can ignore this. Maybe I really want to call this, I often like to name it this way, just rename this as runner. So I'll show you what I just did again. If I right click on this and go down to refactor and rename, or just press Control R, I can now rename something like runner. And if I press refactor, we'll see inside of this file that it actually changes the name for me automatically. Anywhere that reference this name will get automatically changed. If I had changed it without doing that, then it wouldn't have echoed through the rest of my code, and then things wouldn't have been updated all in synchronization. Okay, I can even do this with other things in my code. For example, if I have just a variable here, I'll just call this num, and I'll set it to, I don't know, the value 3 for now. And then maybe I want to say like print, sorry, not print, I'm thinking of my Python code, num, and I'm going to print out num itself, and maybe I want to say num plus equals 4, and I want to print it out again, new num, So just some very simple functionality here. Notice I create num here, and I've referenced it 1, 2, 3 times. What if I wanted to name this a little bit better? Like maybe I want to say num input. Well, if I change it here, it's not changed in all these spots. And I have to go in and manually change it 3 times. That's not the right way to do it. If I highlight num, right click, refactor, rename. Now if I call this num input and press refactor, it changes it in all the places. So I can update the naming really easily in a way that echoes through my code. So there's a second tip for you. If you start to have more and more code and you want to rename, just highlight and refactor rename, and it will save you a ton of time and probably help you avoid misnaming things and echoing errors throughout your code. I actually don't want these numbers, not relevant to my game right now. So what's the kind of the third and maybe final tip I want to show you for right now? Well, once I'm beginning to prototype something, I could just start typing code, but there's something very important that we have in writing code. Commenting. Oops, we're in Java. Commenting. This is the concept of documenting your code with notes, explanations, annotations, things like that. And a lot of students, some of you last year did this a lot, but a lot of students, even in grade 12, forget about commenting until the very end of their program. And kind of ask the question, Mr. L, why do I need to comment? I wrote my whole program without any comments, and now I have to just go back and add them after the fact. I kind of get if someone else is to look at this program, maybe I want to explain what I'm doing a bit better. Maybe it's helpful for you, but really, like, what's the point of commenting? Well, maybe the best example of where comments are useful is at the beginning phases of developing an algorithm or some content for an experience. Let me show you exactly what I mean here. So in this game, maybe in part 1, I'll add some space here. The first thing that I want to have happen is, well, I'm just brainstorming live right now. And while I'm brainstorming and thinking about the structure of my experience, I'm going to put in comments as what I consider a form of pseudocode, kind of like just English explaining how I want my code to run, but having it written in my code as comments to kind of explain and fill in the areas where I'm going to add more content in later. So maybe the first thing I want to do is present the user with a menu of choices. Okay, so that's going to happen in this first section here. And then I need to gather the user's choice. And then I need to process the choice and redirect them to the relevant part of the game, or maybe of the choices. So maybe there's like a branching story, or maybe you have like some different options for viewing stats, changing equipment, start a battle, or something like that. So now, what are the choices that I might have for the user here? Well, in the first place, a menu of choices. What if I had my number 1 for this game in particular is view stats, and a second one is use item if I want to set something up, and a third one might be view opponent list and stats to kind of see what I'm up against next, so I can like set things up. Maybe I want to change equipment, provide the opportunity for me to adjust something from the opponents that I know, and or maybe the fifth one is start battle. So this would then allow me to like kick off a battle, or maybe the sixth one is quit game. Okay, so I have like my ideas for the menu kind of documented here, and now I've organized and I'm ready to put in, well, in this case, I guess it's just kind of some print statements. So something that I could do right off the bat right now is convert these comments into actual logic. So view stats. And here's an example of where a comment might only be temporary, just to help you organize. View stats, I might just actually take this, now that I'm happy with that list of things, and pop it in there. And maybe I'll do another one for this. Like I'm pretty happy that these are the menu options I'm going to provide. Oops. So I could go through and just kind of replace these comments with the actual functionality, because these don't really need a comment with them. But I use the comments initially to help organize my things. But this comment up here might still be useful because it still documents what's going on in this category. So far, this is almost like a to-do list. I still need to finish off turning this idea into the actual code. Pretty simple up here, but what about gathering the user's choice? Well, right now, while I'm just documenting my concept, I know I have to create a scanner and get the information and process it. Okay, I'll deal with that later. I'm just going to leave the comment. Maybe I even want to write to do beside it to know that there's still something I have to do in this section. But now I can process the choices. So what do I want to do for the processing? Well, maybe I want to start documenting some ideas. If 1, then direct them to some method that I built. And here's where I can start to kind of think about the methods that I might want to make. This view stats. Well, private void view stats is a method that I'm going to want to access. It's a behavior, a specific choice the user can take. So I'm going to need some to access this view stats thing. Okay, and then if to, I can view my next thing, which is use item. Oops, typo there. Use item. So I've now created this method that exists, and I'm providing the link for the player. Right now, I'm just kind of building the rough outline of some content that I need to fill in the actual logic for later. My third one, view opponent info, might be the method name for this. I can copy and paste this up here. If 3, I want to do this next, and then if 4, 5, and 6. So what I'm doing is kind of just building the outline skeletal framework of the main functionality of my program. And clearly, I haven't solved this view stats problem yet. I have to add in some code, but the framework's here. And so I could actually kind of chip away at building this menu. So what if I actually got like a scanner, scan equals new scanner, system.in, and then hit my, oops. Actually, I should probably have that open. Alt-enter to import here. Let's do that to maximize my screen for now. This is Control-Shift-Enter. Maybe I should have done this sooner. This looks actually quite nice. And so I have my scanner, and I want to say that the string, maybe I'll tell the user to choose from the menu list above, and then I want to say string choice equals scan, and the next line. So I've got this in here, so I have a choice that's been made, and now I can process this. So in place of this comment, I say, well, if choice is 1, then this is the outcome of that. And what have I done? Oh, this is a choice here. So because it's a string, if choice, I have to say dot equals for a string. So if my choice is equal to 1, I can process this just as a string if I want to, view stats. Else if choice equals 2, I want to process this logic right here. Use item. If choice is 3, and then I can slowly kind of fill in the relevant pieces that I built one at a time from the comments that I have left. And I'm going to replace the ones that are really obvious, that are self-explanatory, but I'm going to leave in the comments that are kind of the more generic categorical ones that kind of organize the program structure. Okay, so we're kind of building the menu system. I can think about how I could expand upon that to come. I still have some information to put in, but I know I have to still, fill in these empty slots. The comments just are a really quick note of what I want to actually add. And I'm starting to build a to-do list of comments that have some functionality to add in still. What about down here? Well, what if I commented inside of this for my view stats what it is that I want this to do? So what do I need to do here? I need to potentially, here's just a pseudo algorithm. Maybe you have a different solution in your game to think about how do I view stats? Well, first I need to access the master list of enemies in the game. So I need to do that first. And then to view the stats, I need to present the player with a choice for which enemy to view. And then I need to show the player the stats on that enemy. Maybe it's as simple as that. So that I first get a reference to that master list, and then give the player some choice, and then show the player the stats on that enemy that they chose. So the player has some choice. Well, guess what? This whole view stats functionality of my game, I've kind of summarized the whole algorithm right here, which sometimes is the easy part, but you know what? Sometimes actually can kind of coming up with the algorithm itself is the challenging bit. And actually writing the code isn't too bad if other things are already set up and in place. But now that I have this kind of structure, this is almost like a to-do list. To get view stats to work, I know I have to build a little algorithm for this, and then some functionality for this, and finally this. And once all 3 parts are done, this whole algorithm will be checked off. And I could, if I wanted to be really organized, just put a to-do beside this as well. And I can erase this once all 3 parts are done to kind of keep track of pieces of my program that I'm building. I could do the same thing here. Use item. I can first show the user the list of items they are holding. Next, I need to provide them a choice to use or not use an item. Or actually, maybe this algorithm, provide them a choice of which item to use. So here I'm just creating my algorithm as I'm kind of brainstorming which item to use, and then ask them to confirm if they want to use it, just to make sure they don't make any accidental commitments. Man, I'm losing my ability to speak as I think here. To confirm if they want to use it, and finally, I'm gonna actually use the item. So this is the whole algorithm I need for this. So I have another to-do on my plate to solve these 4 things. But now as I write the code, I should leave these comments in because they provide a nice summary of the algorithm in text form, and then the actual code will fill in underneath it. And by the time you're ready to submit your project, you have all sorts of leftover pseudocode that you use to organize your ideas in advance that just become the comments that document how your code works after it's done. So now you've kind of killed 2 birds with 1 stone. You've helped organize your ideas in the first place, which is useful to make sure your algorithms make sense and for you to kind of quickly throw down a bunch of ideas without having to write all the code first. And then after you've written in your solution in the space below it, you leave them in as the documentation of your algorithms and get credit, full credit, for actually including comments in your program. So something that I'd love to see from all of you is code that's mostly comments to begin with, and then slowly over time, some of those comments are replaced with functionality, and others are simply just left as kind of a representation of the overall conceptual structure of your program. I hope I've convinced you of the value of comments. Whether or not you totally agree, you are required to include them. You'll notice that in some of your project rubrics that there is a hard cap on one of the scores you can get if you don't have comments, meaning that your code can be the most sophisticated code I've ever seen, and it can be beautiful and perfect and everything can be wonderful, but if you have no comments, you can't score higher than a 6. So please take this seriously, and hopefully some of these tips help you get up and running on your new concept ideas a lot more efficiently and successfully.